All right, let's dive into some serious horror, the kind that messes with your head long after you've finished the book.
We're going deep, beyond just surface scare.
Exactly. We're going to figure out what makes these books tick, why they're considered classics, so you can impress your friends with your horror knowledge.
And maybe even discover a new favorite.
So, are you ready to get spooky?
Oh, I'm always ready for a good scare.
All right, let's do it. Today, we're looking at 5 novels, each one a masterclass in horror, but in very different ways. We've got John Langan's The Fisherman, Richard Matheson's Hell House. Then there's Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. Can't forget Stephen King's The Shining, and of course, the granddaddy of them all, William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist.
A solid lineup. We've got psychological horror, haunted houses, demonic possession.
A little something for everyone. By the end, you might even have your own pick for the most terrifying of the bunch.
Sounds like a challenge.
It is a challenge to your sanity. But let's start with The Fisherman. It's a great example of what we call slow burn horror. I mean, just the title itself, The Fisherman, it doesn't exactly scream terror, does it? But trust me, this book gets under your skin.
It does, and that's the brilliance of it. Langan takes something as ordinary as fishing, a peaceful pastime, and twists it into something deeply unsettling.
It's like he's saying, hey, you think you're safe out there in nature, think again.
Right. And the way he structures the story, with layers of narrative, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion, but each layer reveals something darker, more disturbing.
I love a good nested narrative. You've got these 2 widowers, Abe and Dan, bonding over their shared grief through fishing. Then they meet this mysterious character, Howard, who tells them a story, a terrifying tale about this figure called the Fisherman.
Exactly, and that story within a story just sucks you in. You're experiencing the horror right alongside the characters, feeling their growing dread as the tale unfolds. And it makes you question what's real and what's not.
So, what exactly is it about the fisherman himself that makes him so terrifying? I mean, is he a ghost, a demon, some kind of ancient entity?
That's the thing. Langan never explicitly defines what the fisherman is. He exists in this liminal space between reality and nightmare, preying on vulnerable individuals, those who are already grappling with grief and loss.
So it's not just about jump scares, it's about that creeping sense of dread, the feeling that something is wrong, out of balance, like the world itself is tilted on its axis.
Right. And Langan uses symbolism really effectively to amplify that feeling. Everyday objects like fishing hooks and even the river itself take on this sinister quality. It's like the setting itself is closing in on the characters.
I can totally see that. The river, this symbol of life and nature, becomes something dark and threatening. Okay, so we've got this slow burn, psychologically driven horror in The Fisherman. Now let's shift gears to Hell House by Richard Matheson. How does his approach to horror differ from Langan's?
Think of The Fisherman as a slow simmer and Hell House as a full-on boil. Matheson goes for a much more direct, in-your-face kind of horror. He takes a classic haunted house trope and cranks it up to 11.
So what makes this house so hellish? What sets it apart from your average haunted mansion?
Well, for starters, it's not just haunted, it's practically sentient. This house is a force of nature, a swirling vortex of negative energy that can drive people mad.
Okay, that's creepy. A house with a personality, not a very nice one. But what's the story about? Who are the unlucky souls that end up in this nightmare?
We've got a team of investigators, a physicist, a medium, a psychic. They each have their own reasons for being there, their own theories about the supernatural, but they're all united in their desire to understand what makes Hell House tick.
So it's a clash between science and the supernatural, logic versus intuition.
Exactly, and it plays out in some pretty terrifying ways.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. This evil, this energy that permeates Hell House, is not just some random force. It's tied to the house's creator, Emmerich Belasco.
Yeah.
He was, let's just say he was a very disturbed individual who orchestrated his own death to increase his power within the house.
Hold on, he's controlling things from beyond the grave. That's a whole new level of messed up.
It is, and it raises some interesting questions about the nature of evil and the afterlife. But what I find most fascinating about Hell House is the idea that technology, scientific methods, they're ultimately useless against this kind of evil.
So how do you fight something like that?
Matheson suggests that the only way to survive is to defy your fear, to stand your ground against the darkness, to confront it head on.
That takes serious guts. I don't know if I could do that.
All right, so we've got the slow burn psychological dread of The Fisherman and the in-your-face terror of Hell House. Now, let's move on to a novel that's considered a true masterpiece of psychological horror, Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. What makes this one so special? The Haunting of Hill House is a masterclass in unsettling ambiguity. Jackson doesn't just tell you a ghost story. She makes you question the very nature of reality itself.
That's fun.
It is, in a terrifying sort of way.
Mhm.
A lot of that comes from the use of an unreliable narrator, Eleanor Vance. She's drawn to Hill House, hoping to find a sense of belonging, but her own fragile mental state makes it impossible to know what's truly happening.
Ah, the unreliable narrator, a classic horror trope. You never know if what you're reading is real or just a figment of the character's imagination.
Exactly. And with Eleanor, it's even more unsettling because she's so vulnerable, so desperate for connection. The house itself becomes this mirror, reflecting her deepest fears and anxieties.
And so it's not just a haunted house, it's a haunted mind. The real horror is internal.
You could say that, and Jackson never gives you a definitive answer. Is the haunting real or a product of the character's psyches? That's up to the reader to decide.
That's what makes it so effective, right? You're left with this lingering sense of unease, wondering if the real monsters are the ones we create in our own minds.
Exactly. Now, are you ready for the king of horror?
Bring on the king. All right, let's talk about The Shining. It's one of those books that has seeped into popular culture, that iconic image of Jack Nicholson's crazed grin peering through the door. But what is it about the novel itself that makes it so terrifying?
The Shining is a multi-layered horror story.
Yeah.
You've got the Overlook Hotel, this grand, isolated structure that's more than just a setting. It's a character, a malevolent entity with its own agenda.
So the hotel is alive, like it has a consciousness.
In a way, yes. It feeds off the negative energy of the people who stay there, their despair, their anger, their fear.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a particular interest in Danny Torrance, Jack's son.
Because Danny has the Shining, right? That psychic ability. I remember that from the movie.
Exactly. Danny's shining makes him both a target and a witness to the Overlook's horrors. He can see things that others can't, glimpses of the hotel's dark past and the spirits that reside within its walls.
So he's like a canary in a coal mine, except instead of warning about gas leaks, he's warning about ghosts and demonic entities. But isn't his dad, Jack, the one who really goes off the deep end?
Right. Jack Torrance is a fascinating character, a deeply flawed man struggling with alcoholism and inner demons. King masterfully portrays his descent into madness, how the isolation, the pressure, and the Overlook's influence push him over the edge.
And it's not just about the supernatural, right? It's about the darkness within us all, the potential for violence and cruelty that can be unleashed under the right circumstances.
Absolutely. The Shining is as much a story about the human psyche as it is about a haunted hotel. It's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones lurking in the shadows, but the ones we see reflected in the mirror.
Okay, so we've covered 4 of the 5 novels on our list. The Fisherman, Hell House, The Haunting of Hill House, and The Shining. We've encountered ancient entities, malevolent spirits, haunted houses, and the darkness that resides within us all. Now we come to The Exorcist. This is a book that has terrified generations of readers, and the movie, well, let's just say it's not for the faint of heart. What makes The Exorcist such a powerful and enduring horror story?
The Exorcist takes us into the realm of demonic possession. It's a topic that's both fascinating and terrifying, and Blatty handles it with a level of realism and psychological depth that sets it apart from other possession stories.
So it's not just about a little girl spitting pea soup and speaking in tongues.
No, it's so much more than that. Blatty explores the clash between faith and doubt, the limits of human understanding, and the profound terror of encountering something truly evil.
Right. The story centers around Regan McNeil, this seemingly ordinary 12-year-old girl who becomes possessed by a demonic entity. But what makes it so effective is that we see this horrific event unfold through the eyes of her mother, Chris.
Chris McNeil is a fascinating character. She's an actress, a single mother, and a self-proclaimed atheist. But when her daughter starts exhibiting these bizarre and terrifying symptoms, she's forced to confront her own beliefs or lack thereof.
So it's not just a horror story. It's a story about a mother's love for her child, about the lengths we'll go to protect the ones we care about, even in the face of the unimaginable.
Exactly. And Blatty doesn't shy away from the graphic and disturbing aspects of possession. Regan's transformation is described in vivid detail, and the things she says and does while possessed are truly horrifying. But it's not just about shock value. Blatty uses these elements to explore the nature of evil, the power of belief, and the fragility of the human psyche.
And let's not forget about the priests, Father Damien Karras and Father Lancaster Marin. They're the ones who ultimately have to confront the demon, to wage this spiritual battle for Regan's soul.
And their struggles are just as compelling as Chris's. Karras in particular is a tortured soul. He's a Jesuit priest and a psychiatrist, so he's constantly grappling with the conflict between his faith and his scientific training. The exorcism itself is a brutal, physically and emotionally draining experience, and it tests everyone involved to their absolute limits.
All right, so we've got 5 incredible novels, each with its own unique brand of terror. From the slow burn dread of The Fisherman to the in-your-face horror of Hell House, the psychological unraveling of The Haunting of Hill House, the exploration of inner darkness in The Shining, and the battle between faith and doubt in The Exorcist. These books offer a chilling and thought-provoking glimpse into the dark side of the human experience. Now I'm dying to know.
Dying to know what? Don't leave us hanging.
Which one do you think takes the crown for most terrifying?
That's a tough one. It's like comparing apples and oranges. Each novel excels in different ways, targeting different fears and anxieties.
True, true. But you must have a favorite, right? Don't leave me and our listener hanging.
Well, if I had to choose.
You do. You have to pick one.
All right. I'd say The Fisherman. It's just so unsettling. Langan's ability to create that creeping dread using something as ordinary as fishing. It's masterful, the kind of story that stays with you.
Yeah, The Fisherman definitely gets points for originality. I mean, who knew fishing could be so terrifying? But Hell House really got me too. That whole idea of a house that's not just haunted, but like a conscious entity.
Oh, absolutely. And with Hell House, I think it's the clash between science and the supernatural that makes it so effective. You've got these investigators with all their gadgets and theories, and they're completely outmatched.
Right, like trying to fight a hurricane with a fly swatter.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that there are things out there, forces we may never understand, and sometimes trying to explain them just makes it worse. And then there's the question of where the evil actually comes from. Is it the house itself, or is it something deeper, something human?
Because of Belasco, the guy who built the house, like his darkness is somehow imprinted on the place.
Right. He chose that evil, it wasn't random. Which makes you wonder about the choices we all make, the potential for darkness within each of us.
Ooh, getting philosophical. But that's what good horror does, right? Makes you think. And speaking of thinking, we gotta talk about The Haunting of Hill House and Shirley Jackson, queen of messing with your mind.
She really is. And with Hill House, it's all about the unreliable narrator, Eleanor. We see everything through her eyes, but we can't trust her perceptions.
Which makes it so much creepier. Because you're never quite sure what's really happening. Is it the house, or is it all in her head?
Exactly. And the house itself, with all its weird angles and shifting architecture, it becomes a reflection of Eleanor's own internal state, like her anxieties are taking physical form.
So it's like the house is feeding off her, amplifying her fears. That's some seriously messed up stuff.
Oh yeah, Jackson was a master of that, taking those everyday anxieties and twisting them into something truly terrifying. It's like she's saying, hey, the scariest monsters are often the ones we create ourselves.
Okay, so we've got ancient entities, haunted houses that are practically alive, and now houses that reflect our own internal darkness. Where does Stephen King and The Shining fit into all of this?
Well, King is a master of tapping into those primal fears, those things that lurk in the dark corners of our minds. And with The Shining, he explores the horror of isolation, the breakdown of family, and the power of addiction.
Right, it's not just about the ghosts in the Overlook Hotel, it's about the ghosts within Jack Torrance, his alcoholism, his rage, his inability to control those darker impulses.
Exactly. King shows us how easily a seemingly ordinary person can be driven to do terrible things, especially when they're isolated and under pressure. The Overlook Hotel, with its oppressive atmosphere and dark history, just acts as a catalyst, pushing Jack further and further down that path.
It's like the hotel is a pressure cooker and Jack is the pot about to boil over.
Perfect analogy. And then you got Danny with his Shining caught in the middle of it all. He's both a victim and a witness to his father's descent into madness.
Which adds this whole other layer of tragedy to the story, right? Because you're not just scared for Jack, you're scared for Danny, too. He's so vulnerable, so innocent.
Exactly. King doesn't pull any punches when it comes to exploring the psychological toll that horror can take on individuals and families. And the ending, well, let's just say it's one of the most iconic and terrifying scenes in horror literature.
No spoilers. But yeah, The Shining definitely earns its place in the Horror Hall of Fame.
Okay, last but not least, we have The Exorcist. This is a book that has scared the pants off of readers for decades. What do you think sets it apart from the other novels we've discussed?
The Exorcist goes straight for the jugular, doesn't it? It tackles that primal fear of demonic possession, this idea that something evil can invade our bodies, our minds, and take control. And Blatty doesn't shy away from the graphic details, the physical and psychological torment that Reagan goes through.
It's definitely not a book for the squeamish, but it's more than just gross-out horror, right? There's a deeper level to it, a psychological and spiritual dimension that really gets under your skin. Absolutely. Blatty explores the nature of faith and doubt, the limits of human understanding when confronted with something truly evil. And the characters, especially Chris McNeil and Father Karras, they're so well developed you feel their pain, their fear, their desperation.
It's like you're right there with them, experiencing the horror firsthand. And it's not just about the possession itself, it's about the impact it has on everyone involved, how it tears apart families and tests the very foundations of faith.
Right, and that's what makes The Exorcist so effective. It's a visceral, emotional, and intellectual experience. It's a story that stays with you long after you've finished reading it, prompting you to ask questions about the nature of good and evil, about the power of belief, and about the very essence of what it means to be human.
So we've got 5 incredible novels, each with its own unique brand of terror. From the slow burn dread of The Fisherman, to the in-your-face horror of Hell House, the psychological unraveling of The Haunting of Hill House, the exploration of inner darkness in The Shining, and the battle between faith and doubt in The Exorcist. These books offer a chilling and thought-provoking glimpse into the dark side of the human experience. You know, it's funny, we started this deep dive by talking about which novel is the most terrifying, but I think we've arrived at a more nuanced understanding.
Yeah, it's not really a competition, is it?
Exactly. It's about recognizing the power of horror to explore the human condition and the different ways in which we confront fear.
You're absolutely right. Ultimately, the most terrifying novel is the one that speaks to your individual fears and anxieties, the one that stays with you long after you finish reading, prompting you to question your assumptions and explore the dark side of human nature.
And I think that's a perfect way to sum up our deep dive into these 5 iconic horror novels. So we've been through these haunted houses of words, these stories that stick with you. But what's the point? What do we take away from all this horror?
That's the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We could just enjoy the scares, but there's something deeper going on. These books show us how vulnerable we are.
You mean like how easily someone could manipulate our fears? Like how even a strong person could be broken down given the right circumstances?
Yeah, exactly. Look at the fisherman preying on that feeling of grief, that loss of control. We've all felt that way sometimes, haven't we? These stories remind us it's part of being human, but it can also be exploited.
Okay, that's a bit creepy, but also, I don't know, maybe it's good to know. Like if we know our weak spots, we can protect ourselves better.
Right. Being aware of those dark corners of the mind, that's how we start to fight back. And these books, they don't just show us the bad stuff, they also show us the strength it takes to overcome fear.
Like Dr. Barrett in Hell House, going in there with his scientific mind, trying to figure it out. Or even little Danny Torrance, facing those scary things with his Shining.
Exactly. They teach us that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear.
So we're learning about ourselves, both the good and the bad. It's almost like reading horror is a way to like get to know yourself better.
It is. It forces us to look at the uncomfortable stuff, the things we usually try to avoid. But by facing those dark parts, we can become stronger, more resilient.
And these books do it in such a fun way. I mean, they're page turners, but they also make you think long after you finish reading. It's like exercise for your brain, but instead of muscles, you're building, I don't know, mental toughness.
I love that. And we shouldn't forget that horror can be beautiful too. The way these authors use language, the imagery, it's powerful stuff. They create worlds that are scary, but also strangely captivating.
Yeah, they're like artists of the weird, right? Painting these pictures in your mind. But as we wrap up, I gotta ask one more time that big question from the beginning. What's the scariest thing of all?
The million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And honestly, the answer is different for everyone. But I think these stories have shown us something important.
What's that?
Maybe the scariest thing isn't ghosts or demons or haunted houses. Maybe it's the realization that the real monsters are often human. It's that capacity for cruelty, for selfishness, for doing awful things that exists in all of us.
Whoa, okay, that's dark. But you're right. It's that recognition of our own potential for darkness that makes these stories so powerful.
It's a reminder to be careful, to pay attention to those whispers in the back of our minds.
So we've been through a lot today, haven't we? Ancient entities, haunted houses, demons, even the darkness inside ourselves.
We have. But hopefully we've also found some light along the way, some understanding of what makes us human, both the good and the bad.
Exactly. And hey, if you can find some enjoyment in exploring the dark side, well, that's a bonus, right?
Absolutely. So keep reading, keep questioning, and keep exploring those dark corners of the mind. You never know what you might find.
And on that note, we'll leave you to your own spooky adventures. Until next time, happy reading!